The Accidental Empire, a journey through time. We are taught that empires are built by geniuses. We imagine grand rooms in London filled with master strategists drawing gold-trimmed maps of the world. But history has a secret. The largest empire the world has ever seen wasn't a masterpiece of design. It was a colossal, messy, and often tragic accident. In the year 1600, a handful of shivering, desperate merchants set sail from a rain-soaked island at the edge of Europe. They weren't looking for kingdoms, they were looking for pepper. They were poor, they were hungry, and they were terrified of the sea. They didn't have a plan to rule the world, they just had a plan to pay their debts. But as their wooden ships creaked into the unknown, a series of blunders and lucky breaks began to forge a destiny. The story was even stranger. The conquest of India, a land of ancient kings and unimaginable wealth, didn't happen through superior military might. It happened because of a rainstorm. At the Battle of Plassey in 1757, the British were outnumbered 10-1. But as the clouds opened and a monsoon downpour soaked the battlefield, the British covered their gunpowder with tarps. The Nawab's army did not. In one wet afternoon, the fate of 300 million people was decided by a sudden change in the weather and a well-timed bribe to a trader named Mir Jafar. There was no grand strategy for India. There was only a merchant company that realized it was cheaper to rule a country than to trade with it. It was greed disguised as destiny. As the empire grew, the sword was replaced by the pen. In quiet offices in London, men who had never seen a jungle or a desert sat down with rulers and ink. They treated the world like a poker game. In 1667, they traded a lush sugar colony called Suriname for a cold, muddy trading post called New Amsterdam. To them, it was just a business swap. They had no idea they had just acquired the future site of New York City. They drew straight lines through the Middle East and Africa, splitting families and tribes apart simply because a straight line looked tidy on a report. This was the diplomacy of the board. They weren't villains in a movie, they were tired bureaucrats who wanted to finish their paperwork and go home for tea. They gambled with the lives of millions, leaving behind borders that still bleed today. Today, the red lines on the maps have faded, and the empire has pulled back to its rainy island. But we still live in the house that the accident built. We speak their language, follow their laws, and play their sports. They built railways in India to steal cotton and wheat, but those same tracks eventually carried the very people who would march for independence. They brought English to distant shores to control the narrative, but that same language became the tool that colonized people used to demand their freedom. The British Empire was a maze with no exit. They tried to organize the world into neat boxes, but the world is too human for boxes. So, what is the legacy of this accidental empire? It is a reminder that history is fragile. It is a story of how a small island's desperation turned into a global obsession. It wasn't built by gods or monsters, it was built by sailors who got lost, merchants who got greedy, and clerks who got tired. We look back at those maps not to celebrate a conquest, but to understand our own messy world. History isn't a straight line, it's a series of collisions. In the British Empire, it remains the most successful mistake ever made. Because in the end, they didn't just build an empire, they accidentally created the modern world.